Okay, here we go. I decided I'm just going to record this to let you all know the kind of stress that I could express of what goes on inside my mind. So I've been writing on the Substack this morning, and it's so easy for me to let the words flow. And it's not like I plan out what I'm going to write, or even if I did, I wouldn't follow that plan, because the words just tumble. And I've written for the most part of an hour this morning, and it's like what people might call a rabbit hole. But they're just in my own memories, and it's just my own story and stuff like that. But anyway, for the second cup of coffee, I actually had to walk off to the shop, which is only around the corner here at Tara's mum's house. And so I'm aware, to break from the writing, even to go and get a coffee downstairs, is a bit of a break. Breaking the train of thoughts, the train can go off the tracks. And to walk all the way to the shop and back to get milk, that's really diverging. My neurodivergent thoughts can career all over the place on a 10-minute journey. And so, of course, yes, they do. And what I'm here to express to you is that the way it is for me, as I walk around every day, I've actually got thoughts going on all the time, non-stop, always. And it's been this ever since I can remember. And my earliest visual memories, what other people would call an awakening, are of witnessing my own thoughts as my own thoughts were making up a little lie to tell my mum that I hadn't been at the pub playing pool, but I'd actually been just around at a friend's house nearby. And my mind observed my mind making up a little lie as I was walking home from school, but actually having been in the pub after school. And my mum knew that I went to the pub to play pool. I wasn't drinking. I was just a 15-year-old, 16-year-old who liked playing pool and was very good at it. And very independent in my way. And then a third voice, if you want to call it that, or a third thought, observed me observing my thoughts and advised me, honor your father and mother, and essentially just don't tell lies. Be truthful. And all these things I do and more, so shall ye in the fullness of time. Which my 15, 16-year-old self was able to recognise as a quote from Jesus somewhere along the line. I don't know if it's actually in the Bible or anything. Maybe it's just in the Irish oral tradition. But I recognised, hang on a minute, here am I witnessing my own thoughts, and here am I being witnessed by a Christ-like figure. There is no figure. This is all invisible. This is all happening within the mind. This is all happening within a moment. But this is emblazoned in my memory, which is why I mention it. And I mention it as an example of many streams of thought in many different dimensions all happening at the same time. For who is the I, as a child, who can witness my own thoughts? And what dimension is Christ in? You're talking some high dimension there of a spirit being who apparently embodied in one particular guy, Jesus, who just happens to mean I am in French. Strange little thing, isn't it? An incarnation of the supposedly perfected human who's able to take on the sins of the world and, like homeopathy, raise those poisons to their highest frequencies so that the poison becomes the cure. So that a individual human, for the human is the poison upon the planet, can become the cure for the humans as the poison on the planet. An intercession between the Heavenly Father and the motherly earth to try and bring these poles into the heart of the child. Christ being the child of the mother and the father of the earth and the heavens. So all these kind of concepts I have playing around in my mind all the time. And just in that 10 minutes walking to the shop, I'm kind of recognising again, but being willing to express. And wondering how can I even express all this in linear fashion, typing, without it just being too diverse. And my mind rapidly responds with reflection of who's even going to read this, and I know some individuals who do read it because they're kind of avid readers and they leave the little heart and they send messages or comments. And they let me know that it deeply affects them and that they highly respect my ability to communicate. So it's like neurodivergence. It's only in the last few years that I'm accepting that people are saying to me, hey, did you know you're neurodivergent? Did you know you're on the spectrum? Did you know you're autistic? I tend to shrug off everything everyone says because, while at the same time I take to heart everything everyone says and I examine it and I wonder. But again, the who is the I, because some part of me is shrugging it off and some other part of me examining every bit of it and some other part of me already knows all of this. Anyway, so where I am is allowing myself to just express all of this, aware that some part of me wishes to remain invisible. Some part of me wishes to just live my life quietly. Some part of myself just loves to have the freedom to go to bed whenever I want and wake up whenever I want. To not have to have a routine, to not have to work for anyone else in order to earn a wage, in order to pay my way in this material realm. To not be subjugated to any government, to not be subjugated to any tax, to not be subjugated to any outside authorities. And so I also recognise that, having so many thoughts is equivalent to having psychic attacks, because my own mind can turn against myself, because what's called negativity is obviously needed to balance the positivity, and I keep myself under a fairly tight rein most of the time because I've seen what I'm like if I let myself be completely free, and especially in my youth, in my late teens and all the way through my 20s, I did at times allow myself to be very free. Through a massive consumption of magic mushrooms, to massive consumption of mega doses or heroic doses of DMT and other kinds of psychedelics like acid, like just name a whole load of them. The things I always stayed away from are all these powders, the things that people put up their noses. That's always seemed a bad idea to me, and it's never been something I'm interested in, or those kind of crowds aren't really interested in me, and I don't get dragged into those crowds, or never did. So I am more attracted to these fairy realms, and these fairy realms are very attracted to me, whereas those more man-made demonic realms, of the powders, of the cocaine and the crack and the what's called speed, amphetamines, what's the other one, the horse tranquilizer powder, those crowds are not very attracted to me. I tend to annoy them a little bit with my high-speed brain. But the thing I was mentioning there is that I somehow am able to slow down my brain. I'm somehow able to achieve a sense of peace, even in those times where I've let myself go so fast, so hyper, so invested in the stories that are running in my head and the multiple stories that are running in my head, because it's the equivalent of this laptop here. I can have 50 tabs open on the browser for the internet, and my computer is a smart enough computer that it's got enough memory capacity and enough processing power to be able to run that many different processes all at once without totally crashing. My mind is like that at various times. I can have so many tabs open and so many psychic connections going on to so many different realms and so many different dimensions that I have to be wary. I can actually drive other people crazy with the non-stop twittering of my voice, of my thoughts, of my agitations, of my promptings. And yet I can bring those thoughts to a stillness. And that's how come I've never been sectioned, despite acting so crazy so many times, so challenging in so many social situations. To be at a protest and to somewhat be protesting against the protesters for the way that protesters are acting in their righteousness. It's quite convoluted, but it's happened more than once. And it is in some ways because what I'm writing about in the Substack this morning is to some degree about all these same subjects, but there's a little bit about the shadow self, the childhood self, the side we veer away from, the twilight, the unremembered stuff that's buried. Because the mind processes so much information, it doesn't hold on to all of it all the time. It holds on to what's useful to function in the outside world. And not many people want to function with shadows non-stop all the time, kind of thing. Sure, there's a market for it and all that, but it's a small market, and yet it is something everybody has. So with me, I'm not an alcoholic drinker. In fact, I only drink sometimes. And it's only ever really spirits that I'm interested in. And I'm only interested to drink spirits with other people who drink spirits, with the alcoholic-y types, because they're willing and able to get their dark, shadowy stuff out on the surface, type of thing. But the thing is that if one is careful about one's thoughts all the time, and if one is careful about what one expresses, and if one doesn't want to hurt other people, and if one contains most of what's going on inside, the thing about the alcohol is it allows one to bypass the reasoning mind and allow those shadows to express. And therefore, when I allow that shadow side out, it's very antagonistic, and it's very able to cut right down to the marrow bone of another soul beneath the personality hiding masks that everyone has. So, it's not as if I even want to give a conclusion to what I'm saying here. I'm actually just wishing to express, here's an example of just how many thoughts I can have going on at once. And how for all these years and decades I've been like, oh, if I just keep on thinking and thinking, I keep on experiencing and experimenting, eventually I'll understand everything and I'll never need to think anymore. And I'll be the Christ who can heal the whole world on some inner realm, quite invisibly, without having to stand up in front of the world and go, hey, I can heal you all, like some outer Christ figure. And I don't particularly mean Christ as being a particular interest of mine. You know, Strider from the Lord of the Rings or any other hero figure in any other realm, but it's the part of self who represents the whole soul self, the part of soul who comes from the higher dimension down into this earth to embody in order to suffer duality, in order to hold those poles apart and actually unify them. Again, like I said, really psychologically, it's between the mother and the father archetype within any of us, for we all are a child of a mother and a father, and all of our mothers and fathers had some sort of relationship that wasn't perfect. And even if we didn't have brothers and sister siblings, we have had other people, other children, other playground members, other parents, other figures in our lives to represent all kinds of trials and tribulations. And so we're all in a psychological journey of a psychological story, and we're all coming to a point of having to recognize that the apparent outside world is not as concrete as we thought, or as we were led to believe. That the binary nature of life has become a quantum nature of life. So these last few days I'm a little bit having to deal with a stress. It's not a new stress, it's a stress around money and teeth and identity. Teeth representing the foundations of how we bite into life, how we process and digest not just food but also information. For teeth are these very solid, hard, incisive, cutting things which fit into these very soft gum things. And so the gums represent the belief systems. And anytime one has to go to a dentist, it's a bit like having to deal with a major rehaul of one's belief systems. And I'm currently spending 2 weeks down south in order to see a private dentist because I can't get an NHS dentist up in Scotland. Anyway, it just means it costs a lot of money, and therefore I've had to raise a lot of money quite suddenly because I didn't know how much work I was going to need, nor how shockingly expensive it all is. But sure enough, they've got all these machines all over the place, and there's mega people involved in running this empire, and they're paying rent on all kinds of buildings and whatever else. So it's a challenge, but it's not so difficult. But anyway, so staying at Tara's mum's, she's an old lady and she needs some gardening help, and there's a guy down the road who's doing the gardening, but he charges quite a lot and actually doesn't do all that much maybe. And he's not so sensitive to the nature and all that thing. Anyway, long story short, in the midst of all of that, there is like talk of there was a tree needs cutting down. It turns out that's a fucking thorn tree. I spoke to the neighbours who are the ones pushing for this tree to be cut down. And long story short, I managed to borrow a chainsaw off the right next door neighbour and make a cut on part of this tree. And me having to communicate with the tree saying sorry that this has to be done. It's a fucking humans thing in his housing estate involving councils and all that stuff. Anyway, the upshot of that is rather than make blunt the already blunt blade of the chainsaw, I decided I'll take the chainsaw down to I'll find a place that sharpens chainsaws and take it down there. And so I did yesterday. And actually this guy who was working who owns the business that sharpens chainsaws and fixes lawnmowers and stuff, I actually got chatting to him when I went back to collect the chainsaw. And it turns out he's like originally he was a National Front guy and a racist and a pretty horrible man by his own estimation. And yet he met one man who did Qigong, which is a Eastern martial art. And he'd gotten into the martial arts in order to be able to defend himself and fight. But actually, this man taught kind of meditation and visualizations that allowed one to go off in one's imagination and actually find peace. And after an hour of this timelessness, come back and find this very violent life he was living to be somewhat calmed down and to realise that there are other worlds. And to realise that going around hating people is not a way of solving the frustration and hatred that you had in him. And all these things. So we ended up chatting for like an hour and a half, me and this man yesterday. So again, this is just a little example of how we find each other and how being open, one can find other open people. And when one is following a path, that path, we're not really alone on our paths. There are many people to reach out to, and I can reach out to very many people and allow many people to recognise me. And because I had exposed myself so openly in my 20s, particularly when I wrote that fairy tale, when I lived in Glastonbury, when I was able to speak in poetry all the time, when I was able to speak off by heart all the time, when I was able to shine so brightly and impress people so much. And yet my dark side is so dark that when I would drink alcohol, when I would become so frustrated and overwrought from taking on so many of everyone else's energies with being such an empath and all that my sense of shame for being so angry, my taking it to heart when people say, hey, when you were drunk last night, you really hurt me with the words you said, with the insights you had, with the way you expressed yourself, or particularly the thing that really got me to stay away from the most loving of people was that I might cause them to worry for me. I thought it's better for me to stay away from the people who really love me, because if they saw what I'm going through, they'd be so worried about me, and I don't want to cause people worry, which again is stuff that goes back to my own mother kind of stuff, and father. So again, I'm going to cut it off here and go back to writing, but I just wanted to express a whole splurge of stuff, which if I were to try and fit all that splurge of stuff into writing, which is so linear and so much slower, well, there's no way to convey that what I've just said here is perhaps 100th of what's going on in my mind. And in many ways, I'm just speaking to myself. And I know there are some few people who are listening, and that's all very well, and I'm very glad to have communications and the feedback that I get. Now I'm going through my own little revolution of realising, hey, I can't just be picking whelks or living in poverty or manual labouring, because I'm riddled with arthritis and stuff these days. My bones ache, basically. And because I don't smoke ganja and I don't smoke tobacco and I don't repress my feelings and I don't blank out the pain anymore, I'm feeling it all very much these days and suffering somewhat, but enjoying the suffering of it, because at least feeling, and I'm glad to be alive. And I've got away with so much for so long. But I'm glad to be actually in my body and feeling what's going on, whereas I understand with the ganja it was actually allowing me to leave my body all day, every day, for decades. Which allowed me to not feel the pain of the world so much intensely. Because as it was, I was already feeling it too intensely, so being 6 feet above my body made it a lot easier to navigate through this world. So I've spent 30 years learning how to come down, to bring my soul identity down into my body identity. So I'm just splurging out a lot of concepts that are kind of obvious to me, which I'm actually aware a lot of people have never even thought of or heard of. And for those who have, it's nice and good to hear that someone else has these thoughts, and these thoughts are not actually just crazy, kind of thing. So I'm getting over myself in the sense of realising, okay, I live in a dream world, and in that dream world there's no harm in expressing myself, and I'm not doing damage to people, and it's not going to do any damage to me. And I'm accepting that having an online identity is not a bad thing, actually. It's a thing that's going on whether we resist it or not. And to communicate is, well, it's a talent and a skill, and to quote the old parables of Jesus, don't be hiding them. And I have been keeping my light under a bushel for a long time, and the parable of the talents, I've not necessarily been broadcasting my seed around and growing great crops. But here I am. I'm committing myself at long last to create a website, to put stuff up in the Substack all the time, to feed my Facebook, to possibly even open a Twitter account, to actually upload these kind of videos on my YouTube, to gather a following instead of me predominantly judging that I don't want a following, that it's not safe for me to have a following, that it's not safe for the people who might follow me, because where I've been going out in death realms so far is not safe for other people to try and follow. And they're not just grandiose ideas. I have known so many people who got sectioned, and I've known a lot of people who've suicided themselves. And I've helped a lot of people in suicidal situations to not suicide themselves, and I've helped a lot of my friends who've been sectioned or who go crazy or who feel suicidal to be able to still their minds and find their centre. So I am aware that it's dangerous to encourage in any way for people to try to emulate being crazy, or to express the madness or the psychosis. And I've not wanted to be an enabler who's making it out as if it's cool to be crazy, kind of thing. So I've not wanted followers for all those reasons. In many ways, just to not encourage people into the dangers, to not be irresponsible, and all that's relatively guilt-ridden, and all that's relatively like past life or my own previous decades in this life experiences. So the main thing is it's been a few years now that I'm quite calm, that I'm integrated on my shadow, that I'm not being so brave and fearless that I'm foolhardy and jumping into troubles in a hasty manner. that I'm able to hold my tongue, that I'm able to acknowledge the invisible so easily, and happy, that I'm actually happy, and acknowledge that that's much because my relationship with my missus is good, and my relationship with my kids is good, and my relationship with my grown-up son is very good, and this kind of stuff. So my relationships with myself is good, and therefore I'm not so much afraid of my dark side coming out and biting me or other people in the ass. I'm not so afraid of representing my bright side without needing to show people, hey, look, I've got a really bad dark side too. And I kind of detest the people who virtue signal to only show their bright side and be so positive, and my mind runs counter narrative to all this positivity stuff. I'm quite into the negative. I consider that the grounding is totally necessary to balance out the high-minded. But anyway, yeah, so I judge myself fit to be seen these days, and to express all this stuff with ease, and to allow people to get in touch, and to offer, I'm actually open to people who have all of these kind of problems that I've mentioned, who could do with counselling to whatever degree, or at least just a listening ear of someone who actually understands and has been there and is still there, with neurodiversity, with insanity, with complex post-traumatic stress disorders, with psychic attack, with spiritual awareness, with enlightenment, with the darkness, with the polarizations, with repressed childhoods, with all this stuff. And I've realised, an energy exchange in money isn't a bad thing, and I'm allowing that stuff to happen. But I won't allow myself to charge any kind of set fee or be professional. The word professional is actually a word for prostitution, and the whole intercourse around money is all prostitution, which is why the word adult is so associated with the working life and being professionals and having to work for a living and earn a living during the week and all that stuff. And so adult and adultery and all of this prostitution of money, of being a professional, whereas I am an amateur. I love to do these things as a hobby, as a living, as a life expression. So I'm allowing people, like I do with the books, just pay whatever you want to pay for my books. Same thing, people can ring me up or write to me and I'll respond. And you can pay back in kind in whatever way you like. But I do realise actually these days it's important for people to be able to pay back, and for so long I was refusing any payment from anyone, kind of thing, which was a kind of a martyrdom in its own way. There you go. I'm going to leave it there and continue on with the writing. So I also have to continue on with gardening later, but I should finish writing first. But here it is. I just wanted to show a picture of what it's like to be so neurodivergent, and what it's like to be so open, and what it's like to need to protect oneself from being so open, and therefore actually not share all that one could be sharing, because it's so gushing, so embarrassingly much. And I've also had a fear of praise, because in my life and in my childhood, the things I am good at I find so easy. And that's woodworking, gardening, all kinds of skillful things, computers, expression, art, poetry. I find all that stuff so easy. And when I excel in things, I tend to get hit. I tend to get bashed back. I tend to get suppressed. And whatever it is, however it is, I get that expectancy that if I shine brightly, then a darkness will attack me. That has been the way. So I'm rewriting those patterns these days and allowing myself to shine brightly and with a lot less perfection, kind of thing. And so anyway, this is an example of all of that. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. Cheers.